Right, and here we are. Welcome to the Unschooled Podcast. Alex Bairstow.
Hello.
Hello, lovely to see you. And welcome to the inaugural Life Library, which, as I said to you a bit earlier, I'm hoping is going to be like a book group on acid. We're going to be discussing mega books and seeing how they've kind of affected our lives. So
it's an excellent idea. Love it.
Thank you very much. And I can't really think of a better book to start off with, your favourite and mine. Dr. Hawkins. He's got a lot to answer for.
Yes,
He's the man. I think I've got to give a shout out to Mr. Nerona himself.
Yes.
Because let's be honest, if we hadn't both done Matt Nerona's last 3-month coaching call, we probably wouldn't have been introduced to Dr. Hawkins.
Interestingly, I actually came across it. It was somebody I was talking to, so it was one of those happy coincidences. The day I was introduced to it, that evening we talked about it in Mr. Nerona's group.
Oh,
so
strange.
It was definitely coming my way,
yeah.
one way or the other.
What I find really strange is that when Matt was doing his coaching program, he mentioned Power versus Force, which is the first book I got hold of.
Yeah.
But then it seems like a number of us, without really talking to each other about it, got into letting go.
Absolutely, yeah.
Almost like attracted to it in a strange kind of way. So anyway, I want to just do a deep dive into this because also, as I was saying to you earlier, I can't really think of anyone more qualified to talk about it just because of what you've been doing recently, how you've been using it.
I have definitely been using it.
So I think what I will do, just for the sake of people who aren't familiar with the book at all, just give a very, very quick précis.
Excellent.
So David Hawkins was, and please correct me if I get any of this wrong, he's no longer with us, but he was a psychiatrist living in New York City, practiced as a psychiatrist for many years, and as a psychiatrist he discovered that psychiatry was very useful, particularly in getting you to an intellectual understanding, shall we say, of your problems and your issues. But what he came to realise was that this technique, which he kind of developed almost by accident, it seems to be a way of bypassing the conscious mind and literally allowing people to get in touch with some of their deepest emotions in a very, very simple and straightforward way, and allowing them to stay with those emotions, bring them up, and literally let them go. It's the title of the book. Was that a fair kind of description?
That's spot on as far as my reading goes. Yeah.
Okay. So, first question: how would you say this book has impacted your life? Because it's a book that I'd never heard of. I'd never heard of him. It's not one of those big titles that you hear and read about. No. Virtually unknown, and yet what an amazing read. So how's it impacted you, would you say?
Well, I mean, I've been reading self-help books for well over 20 years, and I'd never come across this book. It was a total revelation to me. And the first thing that I actually used it for was getting rid of my hay fever, bizarrely, which totally took me by surprise. I was recommended the book, and I read the preface, and the lady who wrote the preface catalogued a whole series of illnesses that she'd cured herself of using this technique, and one of the things in the list was hay fever.
Right.
And I went, oh, hello, because I developed hay fever 13 years ago, totally out of the blue, no experience of it beforehand, and have been suffering with it ever since. So when I saw that, I was like, well, I really want rid of my hay fever, so I'm going to read this book and I'm going to see what it says. And so I started using the technique. And it took me a good few weeks, but I actually got rid of my hay fever this year using this technique.
So now, for someone who's listening who doesn't know anything about the book, it's hold on a minute. You're saying you're going to buy this, and suddenly your hay fever is going to. How does it work?
Exactly that. Well, I didn't quite believe it. I read it and I was like, well, okay, I've bought the book, I've read the book, and this guy seems to think it works, so I'm going to give it a shot. If you'd have told me that my hay fever was emotional in origin, I would have laughed in your face.
Right.
But it was. So what I did is I used the technique whenever I felt a hay fever symptom. I used the technique to process whatever emotions that symptom brought up. in me. Whereas previously, whenever I got a hay fever symptom, I'd take an antihistamine or drink a cup of nettle tea to suppress the symptoms. Instead, using the letting go technique, I actually processed the emotion that came up, and it turned out that I was very annoyed and very irritated and very frustrated. And when I actually processed those emotions, the symptoms of hay fever went away.
Wow.
You could have knocked me down with a feather, to be honest.
Yes.
And it was really interesting. The first few days, every time I got a hay fever, every time my nose ran or my eyes started to itch or I started sneezing, I purposely used the letting go technique, and gradually the symptoms over the course of a week subsided. It took me about probably 5 weeks in total to get on top of it. But what I found about 2 weeks in is that when I was with somebody who irritated me or annoyed me, my nose would start to itch. And that just completely made it real for me. It was just like all this, because when I grew up, I was the sort of person, I was a very agreeable child. I didn't get annoyed with people. I didn't get irritated. I learned to suppress those emotions very early on. And basically, the onset of my hay fever was my body saying, we can't keep suppressing all this. You have to find another way to deal with this. So here's some symptoms to really irritate you, and maybe you'll find a way through it. And it took me 13 years. But now I've got it. So I still got boxes of nettle tea on my shelf that I bought to get me through hay fever season that I didn't drink. I didn't need them this year because I used an emotional release technique to get rid of my hay fever.
So in the book, I'm sure you remember this chapter near the end, Hawkins talks about the whole list of physical ailments that he had. He said, my list was so long, I used to carry it around on an index card to remind myself of all the things that I had. And these were really quite serious medical problems.
Yeah.
And he said that one by one, he used this technique and he managed to release them.
Yeah. And I can totally resonate with that because I'm a physiotherapist in my day job, and I have been for over 20 years. And I deal with a lot of people with chronic health issues.
Right.
And I know that a lot of them are not just based in the physical. A lot of them have emotional overlays. And up to now, I've found it very difficult to address that with people, because you can say to someone, well, yeah, your life is really stressful and you need to deal with that to make your pain better. But up to now, I didn't have something that I could offer them as a way to do that. And this book has given me the technique that I can now share with people and say, buy the book, have a read, see what you think.
Yes.
You know, it's given me an opening, and I can use the story of getting over my own hay fever and what I've used it since to say, actually, it really, really works. You know, these are problems that have been with me for a long, long time, but you can get over them.
Let's move on to the next part of your exciting story using this book.
Yeah.
The next part is really quite exciting, isn't it? Your next venture.
Well, absolutely. Once I'd gotten on top of my hay fever, I suddenly thought, well, you know, what else can I use this for? And I have been an emotional eater since I was in my mid-teens. So instead of dealing with life's little unpleasantries, I would go and eat to suppress them for a bit or distract myself from the uncomfortable feelings. So I've been overweight for most of my adult life. And I thought, well, okay, I've gotten rid of hay fever, so I'm going to deal with my emotional eating, because I've read an awful lot of diet books in the last 25 years.
Yeah.
I know about good nutrition. I knew about exercise. I'm a physio, for goodness sakes. I know about exercise. And yet I was consistently making stupid food choices. And I decided to use the letting go technique to deal with my emotional eating. And it worked within 5 days, because I was already practicing it, so I knew how to use the technique. And within 5 days, I conquered my relationship with hunger. So I no longer eat when I'm hungry. I no longer panic eat when I'm hungry. And I've also dealt with the emotional eating. So all the times I was eating when I wasn't hungry, when I was distressed or bored or anxious or just generally fed up with life, I no longer eat in those situations. So I'm actually dropping finally the weight, the extra 4 stone that I've been carrying for all my adult life.
Wow.
Now just dropping off me because I no longer eat for stupid reasons. It's an absolute revelation. It's totally transformative.
And you've created a kind of community in Facebook.
Well, I have, yeah, because I thought this is working so well that I need to share this with people. Again, from my day job as a physio, I see a lot of overweight people with joint problems. And again, they often ask me, is it because I'm overweight? And I have to kind of say, well, that doesn't help. If you lost a few stone, it would definitely take the pressure off your joints. And when I say that to people, you can see their heart sink, because they've tried. They know that being overweight doesn't help, and they have tried and tried and tried. And loads of people I speak to now, they've been on loads of diets, they've lost some weight, but they always put it back on again. If you're an emotional eater and you don't deal with the emotional reasons why you eat, you're going to pile the weight back on again, because the discipline only lasts for so long.
Yes.
And that's what I found with the Letting Go book is a technique to actually deal with that. And then the weight loss is kind of almost like a happy side effect. And it no longer becomes the main issue. So I've created what I've called the Ex-Emotional Eaters Club, which is a group on Facebook where I'm teaching people how to use the technique, and we're using a kind of group support structure to share this technique and to get it out there. And the beauty of it is it's not just for emotional eating. You can use it for any area of your life if you're struggling. If there's negative emotions involved, if you're a self-saboteur, if you make stupid decisions based on an emotional reaction and then you kick yourself afterwards, why did I say that? Or why did I do that? This book and the technique in this book can really, really help you deal with that. It's been an absolute.
So we're gonna link the group underneath the video, but if people want to contact you, what's the best way to do that?
Just message me on Facebook. Best way to do it.
Okay.
It's set up. It's a Facebook group, so.
Okay, I'll put the link underneath.
Oh, lovely! Thank you. Appreciate that.
I mean, I've used it myself as well. I can vouch for it. It's very, very interesting, the role that hunger plays in our lives and the way we represent it to ourselves.
Absolutely.
Like all of these issues, you represent hay fever to yourself as something that's coming from out there in here. It's actually the other way around.
No. It was your body. It was my body saying, I can't keep repressing all this stuff. I can't keep a lid on it anymore. So you have to do something with this. And it gives you symptoms to kind of attract your attention and say, hello.
I just want to talk briefly about my experience of actually reading the book and maybe compare it to yours.
Yeah.
If I told this, I don't know if I said this to you, but when I first started reading this thing, I had an immediate emotional reaction.
Ah, interesting.
Which has never happened to me. I've never picked up a book and started, welling up and feeling really emotional to the point where I had to put it down. I didn't want to read it for quite a long time.
Really?
It freaked me out.
Okay.
And I realized now, looking back on it, having spent a lot of time studying the book, that the way Hawkins structures this book is that he's created this thing, what he calls the map of consciousness, with the highest levels of consciousness up here, the lowest ones down here. And when he describes the lower levels of consciousness, if there's anything in your life that is still affecting you on those lower levels, and you start reading about them, you may well start reacting to what he's writing about. That's what happened to me. Go on, you're gonna.
I was just going to say, it was really, my first reading of the book was very interesting, because I kind of had a self-concept of where I was operating, and I thought I was somewhere sort of around the middle, sort of maybe slightly above. And then you read the early chapters about apathy and depression and shame, and you think, actually, there's an awful lot of that going on. So I'm operating on lots of different levels. So
I use it as a coach. I started to use it in my coaching practice as well. And I think it's kind of what you were suggesting earlier. If you're trying to make any change in your life, whether it's to lose weight, whether it's to move forward, whether it's to change your career, whatever you're doing, if you don't address the emotional blocks that you have, you are going to self-sabotage. You just
Absolutely,
are.
completely, because your mind gets in the way, and that's what I love about this technique, is that it gets the mind out of the way. I love the bit when he says that one emotion will spawn 1,000 thoughts.
Yes.
That was just a
Yes.
perfect image for me, because I've spent a lot of years intellectually understanding my emotional issues and gotten nowhere, because I still exhibited the same behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And actually I got worse, because I got even more annoyed with myself. With, you know, I've done all these courses, I've read all these books, I'm an intelligent woman, I get this, why can I not stop doing this?
And that is actually Hawkins' own criticism of his own psychoanalysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, is that it intellectualizes it all, and unless you deal with it on an emotional level, it just doesn't go anywhere. You know, you can have a wonderful understanding intellectually, but if you don't deal with the emotion, it doesn't make the slightest bit of difference.
I don't know if you found this, but some people that I've spoken to have actually reacted to this book emotionally. Mm-hmm. In a way that Hawkins actually talks about when he describes anger. He goes into the description of the angry state. So it makes some people angry, this book.
Yes, it does. I think if you read something that rings true on a very deep level that you're not quite ready to address, I think it makes people angry.
I think also if you're invested in a particular method
mm-hmm.
that you've been using and that has worked for you, and suddenly someone comes along and says, "Nah, just read that." It's a bit of a slap in the face.
Well, it is. I mean, and the thing is it's the simplicity of it. It's the efficiency and the simplicity of the method. And one of the things that I've noticed when talking to people about it, and people who started using it, is that they immediately try and complicate it. They try and make it more difficult than it actually is. And we, you know, because we're I think as a society now, we've started to talk about feelings and the impact, and you see it in terms of like how discipline is done in schools and all sorts of things. And it's actually much simpler than we like to think. And I think that's actually the hard thing for some people, is just like, I've been struggling with this for so long, and something this simple is the answer. And I think we have this ingrained in our head that it needs to be a slog and it needs to be hard work, and it isn't.
It's simple, but it's not easy. I'll give you an example. Easy. I was doing some training this week, and I was being asked to do something in a very short period of time. Basically create a completely new course within 24 hours and then present it, right? And I was scared. I was really scared. And normally, because of what I do, I teach, you know, presence and communication skills. I would bluff it. I'd go in and hi everyone. But what I thought I would do is, no, I'm going to just get in contact with that. And what actually came up was almost like a very small child feeling totally petrified. Mm-hmm. And I sat in my car before I went into the building, and I allowed that feeling to come up. Mm-hmm. And not only was that probably the best training session I've ever done, but it's completely changed my view of myself as someone who can work live.
Yes.
So I was actually following a path where I was thinking up until very, very recently, no, it's all got to be online. And now I realize, actually, now that block seems to have been removed, a whole new avenue is opening.
Yes.
So it's a powerful book.
It is incredibly powerful, because you suddenly start to see avenues of development that you would never have seen before, because you were blinded by your own emotional rubbish, blocking you from seeing things. It's like, well, I couldn't do that. So you don't even see it when the opportunity arises, or you shrink away from it because you're like, oh no, I could never do that. I'm too frightened, or I'm not good enough, and then all of a sudden, as you start to deal, like you say, with these emotional blocks, all of a sudden, an avenue that you would never have considered or even seen before, suddenly you think, oh, what's down that, what's down that road? So it is a phenomenal. It's a life-changing book. It's the book that I've been looking for since I started reading self-help books. Now, whether if I'd have come across it 25 years ago, I would have gotten from it what I've gotten as my 45-year-old self,
Yes.
is a different matter. I don't know. I can't answer that question.
Yeah.
But certainly, for me at this time in my life, it's been an absolute game changer. And I thought I knew where I was headed before I read this book, and now I've got no idea, because I had lots of limitations.
Yes, I was about to ask you what's next. Like, what's?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm really not sure. You know, I mean, I've kept my head under the radar for a very long time, because, you know, I don't deal with conflict well. I'm very agreeable. I don't like to put myself in the firing line. And now I have a tool where I can actually address those issues, and who knows? I have no idea.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like the limitations that we place on ourselves, we're all kind of aware of them on an unconscious level.
Yep.
And when we realize that we have a tool which can actually neutralize them, sky's the limit.
It is, but also you have to decide to do that. You have to decide that you actually want to get over that hurdle and explore it.
Yeah, you have to be ready.
It's very much down to personal choice. I mean, I say to people in the group is, you know, once you've learned this technique, you can't unlearn it. And whether you use it now or whether you use it in 10 years' time is entirely your choice. But know that it is a choice. You now have the skills, because anybody can do this. It's not something that you have to be of a certain educational level to use. The book is very easy to read, and although David Hawkins did a lot of research into consciousness, and some of that language may not be familiar to a lot of people. It's not based on any religion. You don't have to be religious. You don't have to be spiritual to get something from the book. You know, and there are lots of things in there. I mean, I've got my husband reading it, and he's struggling with it because he doesn't, his view of the universe and how things work is very different from David Hawkins. But even he is using the technique successfully, even though he's struggling to finish the book.
Yeah.
He's read the technique, he's using the technique on some of his issues.
Yes.
He said, I'm going to finish it because he's found it so useful. And
you're the second person I've spoken to, who has said that reading it has changed their view of all the other books they read previously.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And my favourite quote, which has come to mind as you were talking, is he says, you don't have to read very much of this book, and you don't have to spend very long on it. No. Think of it like a ship. If you're sailing a ship, remember this one, and you change your course by a centimetre or whatever, over time, the direction of the ship could change completely.
Completely, yeah, absolutely, and it's very, very true. And once you've used the technique a couple of times and you feel the power of what actually happens, like for me, it was the hay fever. When I started using it, my nose was streaming, my eyes were, itching. I used the letting go technique and allowed the emotion that those symptoms were creating in me to surface. And within 5 minutes, the symptoms had gone. And that for me was proof. It's like I would have suffered all day with that, or kept it, suppressed with drugs or, whatever. But with 5 minutes of sitting and actually processing the emotion that came up, the symptoms went away. Now, there is no more obvious physical proof than that how your emotions actually affect your physical being, and how the stress of daily living and the stress and the energy that we put into suppressing all those unpleasant feelings that we run away from. Yeah. And limit ourselves with. The power of actually processing that in a different way. And the beautiful thing about it, and like I always come back to the simplicity and the efficiency of it, is that you don't have to go muckraking. No. Which is a lot of the problem with a lot of psychoanalysis and psychiatric approaches. Is that, some people have, I see lots of people who've been through counselling. They've had fairly traumatic experiences in their lives, and they have health problems as a result in the long term. And, they come to me for physical relief, but they've often been through counselling, and they just said it was the most useless, most unhelpful thing I've ever done, because it just made me re-experience the whole thing over and over and over again.
Yes.
It didn't help. It didn't help. And and I'm sure some people do get benefit from those techniques, but the beauty of it is that you don't have to get involved in the story of why you are feeling anger or guilt or shame or depression. You just let it rise and you process it, and it's gone.
It's perfectly natural. It's perfectly simple.
Yeah, it is.
And we were never taught it.
Never. No. I mean,
so that's my kind of raison d'etre, if you like, calling this. My coaching is called Unschooled Coaching, and basically the two questions that I ask of people are, what skills do you need in life to be successful that you weren't taught in school?
Yep.
And secondly, what do you have to unlearn from your schooling in order to be successful? I think this one comes under the first one. We were never taught about our emotional lives.
Imagine if you were taught this when you were a kid. Imagine if you were taught this when you were in primary school. How different would we be? How many of us will be out there doing things that we're passionate about, instead of grinding ourselves down doing things that are not for us because we're too frightened, or don't believe that we can do the exciting things, the things that bring us passion, because we're too frightened.
And we remain in that state of fear right up until the point where we get hold of this book and realise I can do anything.
But also, I mean, from my life path, I've always been a battler. I've come across obstacles and I stick my head down and I butt my way through obstacles, and I've got tremendous stamina and I just keep going until I'm through to the other side. But it's really hard work, and you do reach a point where you think, oh God, I'm not sure I can carry this on for another 40 or 50 years. And the beauty of this book is that it just takes all the obstacles away.
Do you think we've sold it? Do you think we've sold it already?
I hope so. I want to let everybody know about it. It's been such a life changer for me.
Amazing.
And as I say, because of the nature of my job, I see a lot of people in a lot of discomfort physically and emotionally. And now I'm telling everybody about this book. I say, go buy the book. I teach people the technique. I can teach the technique in 5 minutes, but I say, go and buy the book and read the book, because you get a lot more from reading the book. And if you
stay with the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you need any kind of persuasion that it will work, then reading the book will help, because he gives so many examples from different walks of life of things, and also from his own life, of examples where it just works like magic, really. But it's not magic, it's really commonplace.
So hopefully, as this video circulates, people will see people commenting on what they've managed to achieve with the book.
Yes, that would be really, really good. I mean, any kind of feedback is great.
Yeah, and obviously,
I just can't believe this is not a standard text on all, like psychology training.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing. And if any of you want to get in touch with Alex, as I say, I will put her link down below. But Ex-Emotional Eaters Club on Facebook.
The Ex-Emotional Eaters Club. It's a secret group on Facebook. I didn't want it to be too easily findable, because I want to chat with people before we get people to join up. I want to know where they're at and that they're kind of ready to take the change. But certainly message me on Facebook if you're interested, and we'll have a chat.
Great. And you can always like the Unschooled Facebook page or the Instagram page and contact me for any coaching needs you might have. But Alex, I'd really like to thank you for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thank you. It was great to have an opportunity to talk about it and to spread the word.
Exactly. If you're passionate about a book, you really want to share it, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. Fantastic.
Lovely. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
See you soon. Bye now.